Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Product Unfiltered. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Cody Hosterman, Senior Director of Product Management at Pure Storage, a leading data storage company. Cody has over 15 years of experience in technology and product management, and we're super excited to have him join on the podcast today. Welcome, Cody, and thanks for joining us at Product Unfiltered.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation with you guys today, and I appreciate taking the time to chat with me.
Thanks, Cody. Thank you so much. And before we start our product management discussions, would quickly want to learn about your journey in product management. How did you start this journey? How has the journey so far been? And how is it like leading Pure Storage Clouds division so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it depends on how far you want me to wind the clock back, but I'll give you the broad strokes. So, I after I left college, I joined EMC. Right? So it's my last year or so of college. I took a storage foundations course and found it interesting, and reached out to a few folks and developed an opportunity there. And so I joined EMC in 2008. Bastille Day, if I recall, was my first day at EMC, but I focused on VMware integration with the Symmetrics platform, right? So my responsibility was just a solutions architect, a solutions engineer, systems engineer, different names, to just like document and understand how the Symmetrics platform worked with the VMware ecosystem, right? And that was kind of the early days, if you will, around the storage ecosystem with VMware. So there was a lot happening very quickly back then. So it was an interesting job from a technology perspective, and there was certainly a lot to do. And so I was there for a couple of years, and my boss reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, we need someone with your skill area out in California, closer to VMware, closer to the vBlock team, which was starting to really develop at that point." And I was single. I was renting an apartment, and it was 7 degrees Fahrenheit in Massachusetts, and it was 71 or something, I remember, in Santa Clara. And I moved extremely quickly, like within weeks, if I recall, heading out to California. And so I worked at EMC then for a couple more years. And then I had a former colleague reach out to me asking me if I was interested in talking to Pure about a role in the vein of where I was from a technology perspective. And I met with them, but I actually declined because I had just gotten a new role at EMC in the CTO's office, and just wanted to see how this played out. And it was an evolving team and so forth. And I decided that, you know what, maybe this was the time for me to roll the dice a bit, right? And take a chance on a new company, a quote unquote startup at that time. They were still, decently well into the startup life at that point, but enough that it was a little bit of a risk, I'd say. But so I took the role. I reached back out. It was thankfully still available, and took the role. And so my job at Pure was effectively similar, right? I was in charge of the VMware and flash array integration and ecosystem. But one of the differences is that I didn't have hundreds of people that were also focused on making VMware and the storage platform successful, right? Like, at EMC, there were PMs, there was architects, there was engineers, there was marketing, there was everything, right? So at Pure, it was like, people were involved, but everyone wore 13, 15, 20, 50 hats, right? And so there's a little bit of product management, there was a little bit of engineering, there was a little bit of R&D, there was tech marketing, you name it. So it was a similar role from a technology perspective, but much broader, right? There's much more responsibility in many ways, and also a lot of room for creativity. I early on, I described it as like, well, there's 1,000 things to do, so I might as well just do the things that I find personally interesting, because why not? So it was kind of fun in that sense, where it all created impact. And so, fast forward a couple of years, 7, I think, give or take. I've been at Pure now for 10 years. We had a new GM, a general manager, join Pure, and he reached out and asked if I wanted to join the product management team officially and take over the cloud business. And it sounded like a fun challenge. Frankly, like 2000, it was 2020 or whatever it was, like public cloud was a thing, right? I think it was real at that point, for no doubt. And I was interested in it as a platform and a technology, and I wanted to get into that area. And like, this was a great opportunity for not only for me to really learn the market, learn the business, learn the technology, but also potentially be instrumental in like guiding the path and expanding our business into an area that we historically not been in, right? And the fact that we sell storage platforms on premises, right? So I decided, let's take on this challenge and see where it goes. And so I've continued to own the VMware business from a PM perspective, like the ecosystem, the integration, the go-to-market alliance, and everything like that. But really, the vast majority of my time these days is spent on growing and building our cloud business and the investment here at Pure from a PM perspective. So, and that really brings us to today.
Well, that's great to know, Cody. Since you have been in the infrastructure industry for almost 15 years now or so more, how do you see the transition being so far? What are some of the things which were there when you joined, and how has those things evolved in the industry now? Any insights there?
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot, right? I mean, I remember, that when I was still at EMC, there was the message, right? It was the journey to the private cloud. I remember the slide that we had in the deck that the vSpecialist team built. And, so like the concept of building your own cloud-like infrastructure was there as the public cloud started to kind of make inroads, right? Amazon had maybe S3 back then and EC2, and that's about it. Over the years, like, all right, the concept of hybrid cloud came out, and that was a lot of it early on was, I think it was like optimistic and hopeful thinking, frankly, from on-premises, infrastructure vendors, like, oh, maybe this is a thing, right? And then there was like this fear, all right, everything's going to the public cloud, right? Hybrid cloud is a wish, and we've kind of gone full circle since then, where like now it's like, okay, the enterprise is like truly grasping the concept of the hybrid cloud and where things go, and things have changed. Like, even like when you go to the reInvent conferences or Ignite or whatever, I remember a couple of years ago, like when you go to the booths of the vendor, not storage vendors, but general vendors, they would talk about their product and the problems they solve, and a lot of it was around cost efficiency or whatever. But like there was also this whisper every time you go to like at reInvent, like, yeah, we support this in AWS, is great. Oh, but we're also multi-cloud. We do it here too, right? But now it's a lot more of a public conversation around the concept of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud is real. It's being built out more and more with our enterprise infrastructures. And so like the business and the thinking and the technologies have changed a lot in the message, right? So certainly that has been a big part just from the industry perspective that has changed, I think, in the past 10, 15 years. And it's a continually evolving market. Now, personally, right, the transition from being a hands-on technologist to a product manager, why they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. It's just like the time you spend doing things and what you do changes. And, as a solutions architect, like every free second I had, I would log into the lab and figure out how a technology works, and I would write it down, right? I always use the old Mythbusters phrase, if you remember, where like the difference between messing around in science is writing it down, right? So as long as you wrote it down and shared it, it was useful. Right? But, these days I spend a lot less time hands-on in the lab, and my learning is different. It's podcasts, it's talking, it's reading, it's communicating with customers, right? Instead of just trying to like figure things out from first principles in the technology in many ways. That has certainly changed, but I think the focus that I had as an architect, especially when we were a small startup and we were going against very large incumbent vendors, my job was to like, I have to really put out content and figure things out that have direct and true and significant impact and benefit to the customer, right? Like, even if your product is 10% better or 20% better, like, you're not going to switch to some new vendor because of that. It has to be 3 times, it's 4 times, 10 times better, faster, cheaper, right? And so when I would focus on things like, is there direct business value, technical value that comes out of this that really speaks to the person that cares, right? And that was mostly me consuming a product that had been built and then figuring that out. And from a PM perspective, now it's like my mindset is I need to do that first. Like, is this going to have direct and true and significant impact to the business, to the technical advantages to this customer before we go forward with it? So a lot of that stuff played out really well in that transition because it's a very similar mindset, just a little bit different piece of that journey.
No, I think Cody, that's really interesting. In fact, something about your journey which really excites me is you were able to initiate a 0 to 1 initiative, a 0 to 1 product within such a large organization like Pure Storage. So talk more about that. Like, how was it like entering in the cloud business that was completely new to Pure Storage? What were some challenges that you faced initially, and how's the journey so far?
Yeah. I think it's definitely been a 0 to 1 in many ways, right? So we, the just like when I was at EMC, right? Like we sold storage platforms, right? Mm-hmm. Symmetrics and Unity or VNX at the time or Clarion, I don't remember. There's storage platforms that you racked and stacked, right? And when I started at Pure, we had one product. It was FlashArray, the block offering. Conceptually similar. It's a storage platform that got racked and stacked, right? And so the sellers, the marketing, the audience that we had was specifically focused on that. Right? Mm-hmm. And when I took over the cloud block store product, as we call it, it's our cloud offering, CBS for short. We had some problems, right? Is that we weren't getting the eyes and ears and hearts of the people that made the cloud business decisions, right? You can't go to some AWS infrastructure architect and just say like, hey, we've built a better storage mousetrap, right? Mm-hmm. Because on premises, you need to buy storage, right? Your data center does not come with a default rack of hard drives or whatever. You need to buy something. So why not buy the one that's 5%, 10%, 20% better? Sure, right? Okay, cool. Good business model, no migrations, whatever, cool, great. I have to choose someone, might as well choose it. In the public cloud, it's very different, right? Not only is there a default storage vendor there, the cloud provider with the AWS EBS or Azure managed disk, et cetera, et cetera. You have to be not a little better, not the same. You have to be a lot better, right? There has to be direct value. And you're not just selling to some storage admin where you can just kind of go into the details about we have better snapshots or a replication. There's that person, first off, generally doesn't even exist in the cloud. Right. And then if they do, they're still just like, I got a million problems and it's just not enough for me to make a complete infrastructure decision change. Right. And so one of the first things that, I started going after is like, who really cares? Like, who really cares about the value that we can bring there? Who can make that decision to choose like effectively a third party vendor in a native cloud provider? Right. So what are the problems that we truly solve? We have features. These features have benefits. But what is the impact of those benefits? And then who cares about them, right? So I really spent the first year or so really digging into that, right? And the first real tract that I think we got on that was one of the technologies we built our company on was data reduction, dedupe, compression, et cetera, et cetera. I'd say thin provisioning, but that's super old school on premises, but it's actually like fundamentally a little bit new in the public cloud. And what that results in, like, yes, we can talk about dedupe and compression and, the granularity of it and all that kind of stuff. But the end result is efficiency, right? Like, this is why we built it into our product, because Flash, especially 10 years ago, was particularly expensive compared to, per byte, if you will, of the hard drives. And so it was really important to make it cost effective. But that same technology provided business impact in the public cloud, right? It reduces your footprint. It saves money. When you can directly talk, when you have basic just addition, subtraction math, right? When it comes to saving money, that speaks to a very different audience, right? And that audience can make purchasing decisions and strategic and directional decisions based on that information. And so that was a lot of where we started. It's like we pulled away from the pure feature play, if you will. Like, we have these great features, isn't that cool? Instead, it was like, this is the impact that we can bring your business if you choose us, right? Our reInvent booth said, save 50% on your cloud storage, right? That message resonated to an audience that we didn't normally have access to when we were saying, when our sellers have been selling to the same 30 customers, the same 30 people at those customers for 30 years, right? Many of them. We needed to look after and go after a different audience. And so that was a really big focus of the early times that I was involved with the CPS product, is really re-understanding the market, repositioning our sales organization and our go-to-market to really reach a completely different audience. And so that was an interesting process to really pivot that ship. Luckily, Pure is, quote unquote, small enough, right, to a certain extent, that we can do that fairly quickly. but it still took some time to really figure it out. And so that was a fun but challenging process.
Yeah.
But I have a quick follow-up question, Cody, here. Like, when I know you mentioned earlier that you're also leading the GTM for this product, and considering you were leading the complete initiative, how is customer acquisition in such a scenario in which you want to get into a new B2B industry and you are relatively new to the industry? So is it like your initial customer acquisition, your early adopters were your existing customers who managed to take their existing on-premise cloud to hybrid cloud, or your strategy was to focus on acquiring completely new customers? Because I know that strategy would definitely be very challenging.
Yeah, it's an important question. And I think, early on, like kind of before I owned the product, CBS was delivered before I was the PM. I would like our initial customers were exactly that. Customers that had our stuff on premises and they were starting to get in the cloud, and there's a clear hybrid or DR play or whatever, right? And there's business there, but the problem is it limits our TAM to our existing customers, right?
Exactly.
Our existing customers that directly understood our features and our value and then could translate it in their own minds to like what this could do for me in the cloud, right? And that's really limiting. And so we did a couple things, right? So one was we wanted to make sure the value that we delivered could speak to the 100% public cloud customer. Well, certainly we want to support our hybrid cloud customers, and we talk about consistency and data mobility. Like, absolutely, it's an important and critical part of our business. But the mindset I focused on was, let's say they have zero footprint in a data center, their own data center, right? They're entirely in Azure, they're entirely in AWS, they're entirely in GCP, they're entirely in Oracle Cloud, whatever. What do they care about? Like, how do we go after them? How do we solve problems for them without relying on the crutch of like, well, AWS doesn't have a storage product on premises, and so, okay, maybe we're not better there, but we're definitely better here. And so there we go. Like, I didn't want to rely on that. So how do we really solve those problems? And so, a lot of that goes back to what I just talked about, is like, let's relate this to direct business problems so we can speak to the business owner, not necessarily just trying to convince the technologist that we do things better. But really an important piece of this was, important piece of go-to-market strategy was getting beyond our sellers, right? Like as I mentioned before, the people our sellers knew and how to sell and why didn't necessarily perfectly relate to cloud buyers. And so one of the things that we've always focused on at Pure from day one, and we still are, is we're 100% channel-led, right? So all of our opportunities have some kind of a channel partner. And there's a very special part of the channel, and sometimes maybe it's not a subset, maybe it's a superset. It depends on who you ask, but the GSIs, right? The global systems integrators, right? They own the cloud business for many customers. Not only do they sell it or resell it or value add, but they often also operate it, right, for these customers. And the channel themselves, the VARs, if you will, and the GSIs are force multipliers. And so a really important part of how do we get to these buyers, how do we get to solving these problems, is talking to the folks that are boots on the ground with the problems they're experiencing, whether it be hybrid or public cloud. And so an early focus as well was really working with the GSIs, understanding where their selling motions and what they were aligning to, what they care about, and the problems that they were seeing was critical, because not only could that get us into a deal, but once you did that well, once you succeeded in one, Accenture could repeat it 50, 100, 500 times for you, right? Or TechM or HCL or, Wipro or Kyndryl, you name it, right? And so those force multipliers are really important, especially when it comes to B2B, because we can't send our individual sales team at every single customer, right? We need that force multiplier of the channel of the GSIs.
So we also have seen a transition from the capex model to opex model coming in here in the industry, right? So as a product manager, Cody, what are your insights when you're building a product in the capex model and when now you're shifting it to opex model? What are the key differentiations from a product landscape you would highlight?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think pretty much every vendor these days, I mean, you just think about even like consumer products like Adobe, right? They're switching pretty heavily to subscription models, and pretty much I think everyone's personal life is heavily focused on that, from Netflix and Hulu and you name it, because there's benefit there, there's value there, right? Instead of buying a movie for ever, right? You can just like, all right, what's coming new? There's a lot of advantages to it, but there's also downsides, right? Like maybe I do want to own Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the rest of my life, and I want to be able to buy. So it's one of those things that it's certainly always there's a trade-off, in any way you look at it. But overall, it's generally a benefit, especially when you're looking at the enterprise, or really any B2B, where they don't actually want to own this specific and rigid technology forever. They want it to get better. They want it to improve. And, early on, we focused on it from a technology perspective, right? Where we we kind of had the iPhone model, if you will, where yes, you have an iPhone, and then 3 years later, early on, 1 year later, you get a newer and better phone, but like effectively it was the same phone, right? You just do the iCloud update and log back in, and everything was the same. It was just faster or better camera or whatever. And so from a technology perspective, we focused on that, right? Moving from that kind of that capex, you bought this is what you have forever unless you entirely buy something new, to a little bit of that, technology opex of, it's a subscription to, the marketing term we use is subscription to innovation, right? It just gets better and better and better. Renew your support and you get the cool, better stuff, right? And so along with the technology model is where the business model started coming in, moving from capex to opex, right? Just every company out there, every enterprise infrastructure vendor is moving to the subscription model, or encouraging their customers to take advantage of that, right? And providing different carrots around why that matters to them. And it dovetailed quite well with our overall technology model. So it just kind of makes sense. And so we're certainly seeing that interest, right? Because the public cloud is pretty much entirely driven by that, right? There's a few like kind of minor exceptions here and there, but generally it's entirely subscription based. Everyone understands a concept of a reservation or a commit and on-demand pricing and where that goes. And so not only like invested in that on-premises to, like, as customers truly build their on-premises clouds, and can we take like literal ownership of the gear, like we hold the title of the boxes, but the customers buy the capacity, but it happens to be in their data center. There's a lot of interest around that flexibility, and certainly in the public cloud as well. And so it's been an important part of that transition. I think it does allow us to accelerate how quickly we can get the technology to customers, right? One of the differences I've just personally seen in my role between the two companies that I've worked at in my professional career, was that, like, when I was working on the Symmetrics platform, I had the newest and coolest stuff all the time. My customers were 3 years behind me. At Pure, it was super common that my customers would actually have newer gear than I had in my lab, right? And so I was like, oh yeah, I'm using an M20, and they're like, oh, they've got the X50R2, and I was like, well, the features are the same, yours is better. So like there was definitely a change there, and I think that business model helped accelerate that a lot. And so certainly understanding how we can drive value through the opex model and subscription model, and pivot customers off the capex model is critical. And it varies across industries. Some are ready for them, some are not, right? Some countries have different tax incentives and not to provide that. So we're not 100% there as an industry of getting everyone a subscription model, and there's certainly resistance because, as I said, there are potential downsides of not specifically owning things. And so there's still some work to be done around streamlining that and really pushing that out more broadly. But it's definitely where things are going, because there are direct advantages across the board.
Mm-hmm. So Cody, while building products in B2B space, how often do you get chance to actually interact with the customers to gather their feedback and probably inculcate those in your product strategy or roadmap? Because there may be instances where you have few identified large customers who might define your product roadmap or strategy. So is it the case that a small number of customers actually drive your roadmap, or is it more of a holistic understanding of the huge pool of customers?
I think that's a great question, because I think it's really easy to get into that trap, right? Mm-hmm. Where your entire product strategy is driven by, well, let's just the federal government, U.S. federal government, right? It's like they want something, it happens because they're spending $150 million a year with you, and there you go. And so it's really easy to not only fall into that, and I don't want to call it trap, because I mean, you can build a lot of business over a lot of big whales, right? Enterprise banks and things like that. Like there's, there's scale there that matters. But I think part of the problem with that is there's a couple things. Right? One is you can miss small things, right? Like the little nice things, the customer experience things that, the executive at the bank's not going to escalate to your sales team that gets to you about, some feature or business. It's like these little things that bother people. That stuff doesn't get to you if you just focus on the big ones, right? And it's really, and the other part of this is, as I said, it's easy to fall into that trap because, like, as a PM, you're involved in a lot of things, especially organizations that may not have the concept of inbound and outbound, kind of all over the place, right? It's, as we've found out, just trying to like organize this discussion here on our calendars, it can be really difficult, right? To find the time because you're just pulled into so many different things. And so it's easy to lose sight of the fact that no, you don't have 50 enterprise customers. You have 1,000 customers, right? That are using your product in different ways. So I think it is important to ground yourself a little bit and just saying that, like, yeah, 95% of my customers are not specifically asking for it, even though maybe it's not 95% of the revenue, maybe it's 40, right? Or even less. But so I do try to make a lot of effort in that. Certainly, there's a couple customers that do the, like, when they tell me to jump, I say how high. Like I would absolutely admit that happens. There's a couple things on my roadmap right now that are coming from the jumping exercise, but I try to do a lot of things to get feedback, and not even just from our customers, but just like even like conceptually competitors' customers, in the sense where like I closely follow the storage subreddit, right? Like what are people saying? What are they complaining about? What bothers them? Right? I follow the VMware subreddit, right? Because I still own the VMware business on my side of it. I am a moderator on the Pure Storage subreddit, so I keep an eye on that. We have a customer-facing Slack channel where really anyone can join, and I see what's going on there and I communicate with them. So I try to stay active in these groups and keep my my ears to the ground and what's happening. Our vSphere plugin, right, is a feature that I've owned since I joined Pure. It's probably our #1 adopted integration, if you will. Outside of like our API in general. And in that we have a little feedback tool, just like smiley face, frowning face, congratulations feedback, or I hate this, or I have a problem, and, a text box where they can send it and it goes directly back to me and the engineering team that builds it, right? And so I think it's really important because those are like the little things, those little minor usability things often are the ones that can really get commitment from your customers because, everyone's experienced this where there's something annoying, something that just bothers you a little bit. And then when the company addresses it, like you're just like, you feel that they're listening to you, right? Now, maybe, they didn't necessarily listen specifically to you, but I think that's really important to adopt engaged and committed customers to your product when you do focus on the little things, right? Just like anyone's personal relationship with their husband or their wife, like little things are really the ones that matter. And so I think that's a really important part about building the product and gaining that, confidence and commitment and dedication in many ways from your customer base.
And Cody, in fact, while we're talking about getting feedback from customers, how do you balance feedback from these two different type of customers? First, the new customers that you're acquiring. So the feedback you're getting from the sales team or the account management team, or the existing customers that you are getting feedback from all these Slack channels, Reddit threads. So how do you balance the need when you consider developing your product roadmap? Should I focus on building new things for our new customers or focusing on the existing customer needs?
Yeah, I mean, it's another good question about where do I focus my time and my energy and my development efforts of gaining net new logos compared to just making happy customers happier, right? It's certainly a delicate balance in many ways. So one of the things I do is that I try to reserve a percentage of my roadmap that is 100% protected for customer feedback stuff, right? So it doesn't matter how important the priorities are, like that team, that engineering roadmap, those sprints or whatever are dedicated to that, no matter how important or not important they actually are compared to everything else. Because it's just so easy for just like things like that to just slip out forever if you don't like just reserve and protect that time. And so like if I can fit things into that little chunk, I'll do it. They come up and I'll just kind of backlog it. It's like, all right, the next chunk's available. We'll pull this in. And then the other 80% of the roadmap or whatever it is where we focus on, what are the company's business priorities? What are the heavy hitters? What are the things we need to do to go after net new logos? Because it's just one of those things where you can't, it's hard to like, you can put a dollar amount against it, right? Like maintaining your customers and getting that recurring revenue from them. Like there's ways of doing it, certainly, but it's a little bit more intangible compared to we have this $50 million opportunity with, I'll use a company that's not around, Enron, right? Just not to name actual customers. And so we got to do that, right? If we do this feature, we add this multi-tenancy or security, TLS, blah, blah, blah feature, like we can get them and win the deal. So like those things will always fight against each other. So I think it's important to reserve some engineering and product roadmap time to really focus on, making happy customers happier. Right. And then focus the rest on, of course, developing new business and new use cases and new areas. And so I try not to necessarily balance them against one another. Of course, when we do get small requests, I do look at them as like, is this generally useful across my customers? Like this customer that's asking me, we had someone use the vSphere plugin thing the other day to ask for some feature around multi-pathing management and so forth. And like, no, this actually is a generally useful feature. This could help prevent future Sev ones. So this isn't actually really a minor like customer satisfaction thing. This actually is a useful and effective project or feature for other customers. And so sometimes it depends. So I'll keep that certainly in mind. But I do try to focus and reserve that time to the point where I like almost don't even tell people about it sometimes, right? Just to really protect that project. Because I don't want it to be co-opted by something else. So there's tricks you need to play sometimes.
But Cody, in the B2B infra business, just trying to understand from your lens, is it easy to be agile? Because end of the day, infrastructure business, something where the roadmaps or pipelines takes some time to execute, right? So how often do you think that you are able to maintain the agility in terms of whatever feedback you get from the field, you are able to implement those? And also a crucial step there would be, how do you say no to certain things, right? So as a product manager or a product leader, any insights there that how do you make sure that agility is there in the business at the same time you are able to say no to certain things?
Yeah, it's it's interesting, right? Is that there's a couple ways to answer this, right? So to a certain extent right now, I think one of the problems that we actually have is that we're almost, this sounds like kind of a cop-out answer, but I'm going to say it anyways, is that we're almost too agile in the sense that we react too quickly. And things are constantly churning because there's not enough commitment in certain places and we're going after shiny objects and so forth. Reducing the agility, or at least or increasing the friction for it, is actually almost more of a focus right now for us than the other way around. Where, as a business, as an engineering team, as a product team, like we're still fairly fluid and we can quickly pivot and make changes. And it's almost like to the point where it's almost a negative at this point in time due to the size of the business than a positive. That needs predictability and planning and so forth. And so it just kind of depends on the stage of your business and where you are, right? So we're really actually trying to focus on that almost more than anything else. I think one of the other areas around that I've found interesting in particular is that we are, we're not a huge company, right? We don't have hundreds of thousands of employees. We have thousands of employees, right? So compared to some of our partners, we are quite small, right? We are much more agile than some of our partner ISV companies and the cloud providers and so forth. And so how do you remain agile when you're co-developing, co-engineering, co-building products and integrations and solutions with a partner that is not agile, right? And so that's really where I think a lot of the value of being agile comes in, is that we can adapt to their lack of agility, their rigidity that they actually have. Can we change? Can we pivot to deal with it? I've recently dealt with a very specific problem around that where, some large problem went through one of our very, very large partners and completely stalled the roadmap of something that we deeply depended on to really deliver this joint solution. And so we had to adapt quickly and change our plans and really dig into what mattered, and the assumptions or the requirements that we built in the beginning is like, is this actually the requirement that we need? Does this actually matter? Does this actually have to happen in this way, or can we think about it a little bit differently? And so maintaining that agility is certainly, or having that agility has been a benefit, but it's, to the point I made earlier, it can also be a negative depending on how agile you actually are. So this is like everything else. In IT, it depends. There's a balance, there's a delicate balance, but managing that is really important. But I think it's just like before I said, is that reserving some percentage of your time, your efforts, your team, your roadmap to be agile, I think is really important, because you never know when a certain opportunity is going to strike, right? I think with the Broadcom and VMware changes, like it's opened up a whole slew of opportunities for different hypervisor and HCI partners out there that they're all trying to think, like, do we need to make a big pivot? Do we need to do something differently? So it's certainly something you have to be prepared for.
So Cody, since you are a product leader at Pure Storage, so can you highlight some of the top qualities or skill sets you look for while hiring early career product managers, or any advice there when people are looking for entering into product space? What would be your advice or recommendations to them?
Yeah, I'm actively hiring for PMs on my team right now. I just had someone join about 2-3 weeks ago on my team, so I've been doing a lot of interviewing, and we just actually brought in a slew of PM interns here for this summer too. So I've been involved in this, and really, I'm looking for a couple things, right? Of course, it depends on the seniority of the role and so forth, but I'm certainly looking for energy and creativity, right? So like I try not to ask like, what have you done in the past, right? Like, tell me about your resume, right? Because we can all read that and people can make things up, right? Whatever. But really try to problem solve with them. It's like, give them like, just like, tell me the last thing you worked on, right? Whether it's like a personal thing or a work thing, like just what was it? Okay, cool. So what was a problem that ran into with that? Like, if you were to build a startup, right, what would you go after? What would be the market that you would go after? Who would you think about, right? And so depending on the depth and the seniority of the person, I'll ask them a little bit different questions, and often like, especially the more quote unquote junior people, will talk a little bit more about just like consumer products. And I was talking to someone the other day about electric vehicles, right? On the car that they're looking at buying and where some of the opportunity is. So certainly looking for creativity and the ability to kind of just think on your feet, not necessarily subject matter expertise, but just like, how can you build an idea? How can you take an idea? Tell me about an idea that you took, that you delivered to an outcome, whether it's good or bad. Like, I don't care if it failed or succeeded, but what did you get out of it? If it failed, like, what did you learn from it? Like, how did you move on? Whether it's a personal life thing or a professional life thing, doesn't really particularly matter. So just really looking for people that can think through problems, that can be a little bit creative around solutions, and the interest of really going into different paths in the product area. And I think that's important to us, right, is that we're not Dell yet, right? We don't have we're not the market share leader, right, around storage, and so we're still going after, in many ways, incumbents. We have a very large install base now, so it's not the vast majority. Like early days, every opportunity was you're going after an incumbent, but really thinking through differentiation, understanding your competition. How do you differentiate? How do they say they differentiate against you? Right? One of the questions I ask often during a PM interview is, tell me, and this is actually what got us into the electric vehicle conversation, is like, tell me about a time where you've evaluated two products, right? Either professionally or personally, right? And why did you choose that product? Why did you buy it? Why did you rent it, or whatever the case may be? And then tell me why someone might have made a different choice, right? Like, why would they have chosen the competing solution or the other product or the other car? Like, why would that matter to them? And I think just kind of understanding people's grasp around that and the differentiation, I think, is overall a particularly important part of product building, is like understanding your market, why someone cares for you, why someone might care for something else, based on different personas, different needs, right? And so that's what I spend a lot of time during the interviews going through, is differentiation, competition, and, problem solving. Like, how do we actually solve the problem?
I think that's very interesting, Cody. In fact, the question that you mentioned, you share two products with the interviewee and ask the interviewee to drill down both the products, not just one product, is really refreshing. I think, Rahul, that's a great exercise we can do with our
Yeah.
next episodes as well, in which we can share two products with the guest and learn about their perspectives for both the products. But yeah, talking about creativity and the product sense, why don't we shift gears to the next section of a podcast, that is Mind the Product? So, Rahul, would you like to share some key interesting products in the consumer industry and get a take from Cody on what are some things that Cody loves about these products?
Sure. So, just to give a quick context, Cody, in this particular segment, what we try to understand is how has your experience been using the product? And also, in general, what's your notion about the product? What are some of the things you like, maybe from a lens of an end user and also from a lens of a product manager, so that it gives a good perspective of how to think about it. And talking about consumer product, one of the product I see you're quite active on is LinkedIn. So let's take your thoughts on LinkedIn.
Yeah, now I feel like I'm being interviewed. Like, what did I get myself into? I mean, I guess that's what this is, though. So yeah, LinkedIn is interesting, right? There's kind of like a couple different parts of it, right? Like mentioning a website that I used before, Reddit, right? There's a subreddit called LinkedIn Lunatics, right, where they post examples of people that are just spouting out nonsense, right? So it's an interesting platform. Right. So like I used to be heavily active in Twitter 2 years ago or whatever. And I deleted my account shortly after it was purchased recently. But honestly, even before that happened, I was seeing a huge decrease in engagement, right? Just kind of across the board. Where you'd put out a post, a blog post, and whatever, you get a couple likes or whatever it was at the time, and maybe a comment here and there, retweet, etc., re-X, I don't know what they call them now. But in LinkedIn, I was seeing it shoot up. Now, one of the interesting things about LinkedIn, though, is that a lot of the engagement, though, ends up coming from your own sales organization, right? You see a lot of AEs and SEs and marketing folks that are promoting it, but every time they promote it, it pushes it out to a larger audience. Yeah. And so like there is certainly a quantity, quality type of thing going on there too. But definitely engagement was much deeper, right? That I've seen in LinkedIn, and that's continued to stay that way. And I think they've really invested in the platform to help you push your message and really get the insights and the feedback that you want, right? So like Twitter, for instance, was not really doing that. They were just it seemed like they were focusing on who's the loudest person. Let's just make them louder. But I feel on the LinkedIn side, it was a little bit more curated and a lot more engaging across the board. I think some of the problems from a product perspective, though, is that I still feel like there's a little bit of an echo chamber there, and I don't know how you get past that in social media. It's a difficult thing, right? There's a lot of selection bias around who you connect with and who you don't. And it's also what's caused me a lot of, I don't want to call it pain, that's a silly thing to say, but I get a lot of random LinkedIn requests, right? On one hand, I'm like, well, I don't know this lady or I don't know this dude. Like, why should I connect with them? But then the other hand, like, who knows what that might connect me to? Like, so is it worth getting this? Because maybe they have an audience and they'll like, so it's this weird thing where just like, do you curate your audience by like, no, I'm only connecting with people that I've personally met, I've personally had dinner with, I've personally had a meeting with, or I've exchanged emails? Or do you just, anyone that kind of connects with you is like, okay, cool, sure. And so there's this weird separation there on some folks that really just focus on the people they know, but then you're just like, that's your Facebook friends, right? To a certain extent. And what's the point of that? So it's a weird thing. Is why bother having connections on LinkedIn? So I've been thinking about that a lot recently when I've been using it and that reminds me, I was supposed to make a post for marketing yesterday. I completely forgot. Anyways, I don't think they'll care today. It's a Friday. But it's definitely an interesting platform, right? There's a lot of noise, but I think it's still an effective product of getting the message out there, but it's not a great product on getting feedback on things, right? So it's a lot of positive feedback, or like, I find this interesting, but it's not really other than some vendors yelling at each other, it's not really a great feedback tool. So I would really like to see how LinkedIn could change their platform to be a little bit less kind of B2B, like me communicating with channel partners in our field and things like that, to a little bit, how can I really use it as a product owner to get actual feedback? Like that's missing from the platform. And I would love to see that happen. And for that, they need to, I think, incentivize customers to do that. And I don't think that's really happened.
Exactly. I think that's a very interesting take, Cody. Like seeing LinkedIn from a PM lens, always wonder, like as a product manager, should I focus on building features that increase engagement? When you reshare a post, it automatically gets shared across all your network. You are able to get more impressions. The metrics says for the fact. On the other hand, does these features which are building engagement, is it really building value for the users or not? And as you rightly mentioned, that there are times in which LinkedIn is unable to provide the kind of business value that we kind of envision from it. So I think that's a very interesting take. Let's see what is the future of LinkedIn. But yeah, like the second product of the segment can be the EV product that we recently talked about. So why don't we talk about Tesla Model S? I'm not sure if Cody already owns a Tesla, but would love to get some insights from you.
Yeah, so I mean it's a very relevant question. So I last year, and so this is the May of 2024 right now. So this was in May of 2023 actually. I was on paternity leave actually at the time, and I just had my second child, or my wife did, I guess, depending on how you define that sentence. But I had a Ford Fusion from 2010. Right, I bought it just when I moved to California, and it was an old car, but it had, like, I barely drove it. Like I used to bike to work and everything. It had like maybe 50,000 miles on it for almost 14 years of use, right? But it was old, didn't have a lot of features. The safety features were not up to date. It wasn't particularly well set up for a family of four. So I'm like, all right, maybe it's time to get a new car. And I'm like, well, we just moved our headquarters from Mountain View. I live in Redwood City. We moved it to Santa Clara, so it's a little bit further. And so maybe it just makes sense for me to get an electric vehicle, right? My wife has the Prius, so if we need to go super far or whatever, we got that. But maybe it's time to get an EV. And so starting to look at it, and I had zero interest in buying a Tesla. And this was for a couple reasons. One is that I do not particularly like that man that runs that company. And so there's a little bit of a protest there to a certain extent. But also, like, my brother-in-law owns a Tesla, is a Model 3. And I drove it. I drove him to the airport once in it, right? And I found it a very alien experience to me, right? Like I'm used to, I had a Ford, right? I was used to buttons, and the user experience around it was just so radically different that it was uncomfortable to me. And it was uncomfortable in a way that I didn't really feel like, it's like, okay, like sometimes you can use something that's different and you kind of get used to it. And then you're like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I just kind of got to get past that hump. I didn't see the value in it, right? Of getting past that hump. What is this really doing for me to have to touch on the screen to get to changing the temperature of the car or something like that? So, there was some personal reasons I didn't want to go that route. There was some user interface reasons for it. And I'm also I'm generally an Apple product person. I have an iPhone and stuff like that. And I wanted CarPlay, right? Like I like to use that, like Google Maps and everything through that. And I wanted a car with that feature, and Tesla does not have it. And I wanted, I know one of the normal things you want out of an EV. I wanted range, right? So Tesla does that generally fairly well. And I wanted fast charging because, I did want to take it on some road trips, here and there. And so it'd be nice to be able to take advantage of some of the faster chargers that are coming out. And I wanted a little bit more traditional experience around a car. So I started reading up, and I, read a lot of the top 5 lists from Car and Driver and all that type of stuff, and almost without variation, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 came up on the top of the list. And I was like, to me, I never envisioned buying a Hyundai, because I had friends that had really bad experience with the cars, and my other brother-in-law always had one, and the paint always had these problems. So it was not really it didn't even pop into my mind when I was first thinking about EVs, right? You think about Tesla and Rivian and, maybe some of the other larger car manufacturers, but generally some of these startups and things like that. But it was like repeatedly coming up, and I started reading on Reddit, right? They had like 5 and a lot of the positive things out there. And so I went and did a test drive, and I loved it, right? I generally drove my wife's Prius just, because if I wasn't using my car and she wasn't using hers, I'd use that a little bit more efficient, right? And, the difference in torque between a Prius and an EV it was a non-zero. So that was kind of a fun thing to drive. And, it had the CarPlay, it had buttons, it had some, so they make you sign a thing like this does not have self-driving, but like it had the assisted driving that worked fairly well, and, had a heads-up display, which was pretty cool. And, I love the overhead camera view around, that you can use when you're parking. Like it just like looks like it's like a camera above the car. And I'm like, this is just amazing, right? This is really, really cool. So I liked overall like the features and the experience. And so I went with that car, right? And this is actually, it's funny that you asked this, because even though I kind of alluded to it, is that like, this is actually the example that I give folks when I'm asking that question to evaluate 2 products, because like someone might choose a Tesla if they really value the software experience, right? Yeah. Because I think like there's no question that they're investing more in the software side of their cars than probably any other vendor right now, or at the very least, they are doing it the best, right? So there's definitely a fantastic software experience. That you can watch Netflix, you can play video games on. Like it's just, it's definitely light years ahead in many other ways of the quote unquote traditional car vendors around their software investment. But from the driving experience, right? And if especially you want the button that turns on the radio, and you want the button that turns up the temperature or down or whatever, like I really like that, right? So I value that. I value the CarPlay. And I valued I guess I don't know the CEO of Hyundai. I don't know if he or she is a good or bad person, but at least I don't know. So like how, maybe they're deeply evil, but quiet, whatever. Right. But there's personal investment and choices there. And so I think it's a very similar thing, right? When you think about like enterprise product, like I value the fact that I feel our CEO is a good person. Right? I was just chatting with him last week on a couple of things. Like he's a good guy, right? I think that's really important. And so it's not just even about the product itself, but I think there's a value judgment, or even sometimes a moral, ethical relationship that people have with the product and the vendor around it, and that does factor in. And so I think that was frankly an important part of my decision to buy the car that I did. And I've had it for a year now, and I'm very happy with it. You have to swing the doors a little hard to get it shut. And it does not have a rear wiper, but apparently the 2025s do. So they're getting better at it. But overall, I'm zero buyer's remorse. But I do not look at what it costs now, because I'm feeling it's probably gone down a lot in the past years. So I don't want to know anything about that. Please do not leave any comments on the existing manufacturer suggested retail price of an i5.
Well, Cody, thank you so much for sharing all those amazing insights. I think we are closing the podcast, but before we end the podcast, we'd love to get some resources from you which you regularly follow to keep yourself updated in the product space or in tech space in general, with people who are early in their career should maybe check out, or people who wants to enter in the product space and are evaluating whether this will be a good fit for them or not. Any resources which you want to recommend for them?
Yeah, I mean, none of these are going to be particularly profound recommendations overall, but I mean, like, honestly, like I do follow a lot of the subreddits of the different product areas and related places that I use. I lurk. I don't generally engage. And honestly, I even tell some folks on our side when someone's debating about Pure and Nimble or something like that in the storage subreddit. It's like, no, just let the customers, it's good for us to see what they're saying. Right? Because you get a lot of direct insight from anonymous people that are clearly not making things up. I mean, sometimes you can see, all right, this person's a salesperson, they're pretending not to be. But generally, I think it's really useful. And so I do find that helpful to get, what we referred to before about just some, sometimes minor, sometimes critical feedback or recurring themes, right, to help improve your product, right? And so I do actually find that particularly important. And, there's a lot of weird, fun things on Reddit too to look at too. But LinkedIn, I think, is useful in a different way, right? It gives you a little bit more of an insight into not necessarily the customer experience on with the product and the feedback, but a little bit of the sales culture and the interactions, like what you see the back and forth and the LinkedIn comments between Dell's reps and NetApp's reps, like that's what's happening in the field. This is what the customer's generally seeing too when they're coming into their environments and trying to sell them something. So I find that particularly useful, right? So these two things are not like super profound, but I like them. And I think the third point here is just podcasts like this, right? I listen to the Azure podcast a lot. I usually listen to it when I drive into work, and when I'm listening to it, I'm thinking about like, when they're talking about like, these are the problems or this is how it behaves, I'm like, is this an opportunity for my product? Is this something we can take advantage of, either to use that feature they deliver to improve our product or our product experience? Or is this a problem that exists that we can partner with them or work with our customers to solve? And so I do find it useful to listen to those, but think and listen through the mindset of like as a customer and as a product owner, like, what does this mean for it? So I said, there's not particularly profound recommendations, but frankly, that's where I get I spend a lot of my time, and I think are fairly valuable for me.
Mm-hmm. No, that really helps, because having the right domain expertise and channels through which you can get the right feedback would be a very crucial learning for any product manager, that you need to find creative ways to get feedback of your customer or your end users. Maybe that can be subreddit. That's like, this is the first time I'm exploring this route, that subreddit can also be a good feedback mechanism. So something I'm definitely going to take forward from this conversation.
Good.
But thank you so much, Cody, for your time. Really appreciate you sharing all those amazing insights. And I'm 100% sure this is going to add a lot of value to our listeners, because they are in the phase where they're trying to evaluate whether product management is a good fit for them or not. And if they're in their early stage, they want to listen to more product leaders like you sharing their insights on how the journey has been. For someone who's been in the industry for more than 15 years now, it's always very refreshing to see how they started, what were the challenges in their journey, and how have they overcome that. It motivates a lot for people who are early in their career. So thank you so much for sharing all those amazing insights. This officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Hope all our listeners have learned something new and our discussion has helped them engage in new ways. Thank you so much for tuning into Product Unfiltered. Stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Thank you.